Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Inspiring Women in Construction and Engineering. I think it's a fantastic time here, considering we're just off the back of Women in Construction Week and it was International Women's Day yesterday. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on this beautiful spring day. My name's Paula Gray. I will be your chair today. I hail from Mott MacDonald's, the global engineering and management consultancy. I have 25 years experience in the sector. I started many years ago as a trainee buyer on a construction site. So I've worked client side, contractor side, now consultancy side, across pretty much every sector that our wonderful industry has to offer. Although predominantly water, I must say. So I've experienced most working environments in our industry. This is a subject very close to my heart, and I'm fascinated to hear our panelists and audience's experiences today. So this is the start of the year event campaign that's run by Construction News, New Civil Engineer and Ground Engineering. And we're focused here on progressing the role of women and EDI conversations within the built environment industries. Before we start, we would like to mention that this year's IWCE award entries are now open. These offer you the opportunity to celebrate the women, allies, teams and organisations that are making the sector a better place to work. So for today's webinar, we would like to mention that this year's for today's webinar, we're looking at something many people experience but rarely name: non-promotable tasks. So throughout the webinar, there is a chat function. Please do use this freely to discuss your personal experiences with your fellow attendees. And we'll also be taking questions in the second half of this webinar. So please keep the questions in the Q&A function and the chats in the chat function, and then we can have a really smooth flow and get through as much as possible. So without further ado, I am delighted to welcome our speakers for today's webinar, and I will invite them to introduce themselves. Hannah Leggett, Holly Cregan and Lisa Bliss, if you'd like to take a few moments to say hello, introduce yourself, starting with Holly. Starting with Hannah. Tell us what you do and how you do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Philippa. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Hannah Leggett, currently Director of Environment and Sustainability at the Clancy Group, who are a major infrastructure and utilities organisation. So I'm an award-winning E&S specialist with over 17 years experience delivering environmental excellence across major UK infrastructure projects such as HS2, but also working in highways and rail, both operationally and also client side. I'm also a published IC technical author, a member of the Institution of Environmental Sciences, and was honoured to be recognised at the start of the year on the 2026 Social Mobility List. So really looking forward to the conversations and discussions we're going to have this morning.
Morning, everybody. My name's Holly Cregan. I'm the Head of Equality, Diversity and FAIR, which is Fairness, Inclusion and Respect at Graham. Graham are a Northern Irish construction company working across multiple sectors. My background before doing a D&I role was actually in the rail sector. So I started my career as a trainee QS, quantity surveyor, and then moving into being a project manager on railway projects in the railway sector. But I've been leading on D&I now for about 8 years. Passionate about driving change and inclusion and belonging in our sector, and obviously one of the topics we're talking about today is a really important part of that. So yeah, excited to hear what we've got to talk about today.
Thank you, Holly. And on to Lisa Bliss.
Yep. Morning, everybody. So my name's Lisa Bliss. I'm the head of the London Construction Programme and the Dynamic Markets team for Haringey Council. I'm probably bringing a slightly different spin on today's conversation, as obviously working for public sector. They've got quite different rules, the way we recruit and promote internally. I've worked for Haringey Council for over 20 years. I started my career, believe it or not, as a personal assistant, probably doing lots of those non-promotable non-promotable tasks that we're going to be talking about today. But as I've moved up and taken on more senior roles, I have been working within the construction sector, working with lots of main contractors and consultants. And one of our key objectives is really about changing and making real progress with regards to EDI and DNI. So I too am really excited to see what the conversation brings today. And thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So we're going to look at what non-promotable tasks actually look like in the construction and engineering workplaces. And we're going to have a think about why they're often overlooked when we talk about career progression. So I'd like to hand over to Hannah Leggett just to look at those and tell us what your thoughts are on those.
Thanks, Paula. So I think in construction and engineering, those things that are termed non-promotable tasks are usually the things of the work that keeps everything running, but rarely gets recognised. So it's things like picking up that administrative and emotional labour, preparing notes, chasing actions, mentoring and supporting the young graduates or apprentices that have just started, making sure that the compliance is done properly, but also most likely being the person that makes all those issues run smoothly and work between the teams, and also making sure that they're quietly fixing those problems before they escalate. But I think the key thing is all of those tasks are essential, but they often get overlooked in the conversations when we're talking about career progression or when we're talking about evidence to support career progression, because I think they don't sit neatly within the traditional measures of success that we see, particularly in construction and engineering, because they are historically sectors that have valued more things around delivery, speed, technical outcomes, rather than the how of leadership and collaboration. And I think what's really important to understand is that most often than not, these tasks are often taken on disproportionately by women. It's frequently assumed rather than formally assigned. And because that's done really consistently and also behind the scenes, that's where it then becomes invisible. And over time, what that then means is those people that are carrying out those tasks, which contribute massively to the success of the organisation or the project or the team, it doesn't directly translate into career progression, which is why it then becomes a non-promotable task.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it there, Hannah, because if it becomes an assumption after a period of time that there is maybe a habit that that person will keep on doing and they become known for those roles. Would any of our other panelists like to sort of chip in there and give your thoughts on that? By the way, we do have a poll coming up on your screen, so if you could respond to that, that'd be fantastic. Would either of our other panelists like to sort of give their thoughts on what they feel non-promotable tasks look like in their environment?
Yeah, I would say, it's things like the people that get the birthday card for the team member and circulate that, do collections. But then it's also things like taking the cling film or wrapping off the buffet for the team meeting, note taking, is another example. And just the assumption of your role as well. Particularly maybe if you go to site, there may be that assumption about what your role is in the organisation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry to cut in there. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think some of the things that I see within the public sector is certainly that note-taking role, meet and greet. If we've got visitors come into the building, it will typically be one of the ladies in the team that would tend to go down and do that sort of meet and greet and bring people up and make sure that they're looked after in terms of, do you want a tea or a coffee? It's that level of assumption that would typically be carried out by female members of the organisation. So yeah, I mean, I kind of pretty much agree with what my colleagues on the call have already said around what those non-promotable tasks look like.
Mm. I think probably Sigmund Freud would have a bit of a field day with this, wouldn't he? Because, around this sort of nurturing aspect of women in their traditional roles in society. And I don't know many men these days who actually make assumptions about what women should be doing, but maybe there's something hard baked into the background there of expectations, the nurturing expectations. I'd like to ask Holly, actually, that the poll's coming up on screen. I think a few people are still contributing. And the question about, do you take on non-promotable tasks within your work? And I think 48% have said frequently, which to me is quite high. And 41% are saying sometimes. What's your thoughts on those, Holly, those results there?
Yeah, well, they actually align very similar to some of the research that's out there. So, research suggests women are 54% more likely to be asked to take on low reward, non-promotable tasks than men. And there's also research suggesting that women spend approximately 200 more hours a year on non-promotable work. And that's the equivalent of a month of working time, which otherwise could be spent on career advancing opportunities. So that's part of the problem, is that when you're doing that and you're spending that amount of time, so 200 hours or equivalent of a month, you're not promoting yourself or being able to have a career advancing opportunities, attending training, self-development, personal development, leadership development, that sort of thing.
Thank you for that. Do you think, I mean, off the back of that, Holly, do you think women find it difficult to say no without being seen as unhelpful or not a team player? And that they feel bad about saying no?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, women probably feel maybe bad about saying no, because they feel maybe that they should, or like you mentioned earlier, gender stereotypes play a massive part in that women are often the organizer, the caregiver, the emotional support, and those gender stereotypes are reinforced. Some women maybe feel like they have to be that person, the caregiver, the emotional support. It's their role, and I think there's a fear that if you say no to that, you won't get offered other things. So if I say no, I won't get an opportunity again for something that might be career driven, opportunity. So I think that's the risk sometimes of the fear of saying no, just as well as people not thinking you're a team player.
Yeah, there's I've just noticed there's something come up in the chat from a lady called Tony Van Devent. She says she's referred to as mummy or the police. I think maybe when people do say no, there is a habit to mark them out sort of like with a strong female name. But again, maybe that's setting a precedent as well. Hannah, Lisa, what's your experience here? What do you think of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the times, in reference to the comments in the chat, is we as women we're seen as the reliable, organised one or a safe pair of hands, and that perception then shapes who gets asked to do those certain types of work. We are more likely to be asked to organise, coordinate, document, or step in when something needs sorting, whether that's things like administrative, onboarding, or helping to keep people's and processes aligned. But I think it's about how we also challenge those assumptions, because it also sits alongside how men and women often view themselves differently as well. Because I think women on the whole, we are much less likely to put ourselves forward for stretch roles or opportunities unless we feel that we're fully ready or qualified. So I think what can happen is women can quietly allocate essential but non-promotable work but then those visible more career advancing opportunities go to those who actively self-promote. And I think there's an interesting stat that comes from some internal research that was done at Hewlett Packard, and it was popularised by Sheryl Sandberg's book in 2030, Lean In, and later The Confidence Code. And the quote is that men will apply for a job when they meet only 60% of the qualifications, but women will only apply if they meet 100% of them. Now, this isn't done maliciously. It's all around that cultural and often unconscious bias. but that impact is really real because over time, it's those people who do shout up and put themselves forward that gets recognised, and that's where these then unpromotable tasks can become a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I would point out there as well, my personal experience is I don't know any men in my current working environment that target women and go, you must do the admin or anything like that. I think it more is just an assumption that maybe women are very organised in certain areas, and I think that's important to recognise. On that subject, we have Rob Sams in the chat who's got his hand up. Rob, would you like to put your thoughts forward as a male? Go for it, Rob. You're unmuted.
Yeah, sorry. Hello, I am here. Everybody hear me okay? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm in this sort of seminar, probably sort of in the minority, I suppose. But I mean, for me, I have a sort of a more or less a 50-50 split in the team that I look after in terms of men and women. So for me, this is kind of interesting conversation in terms of background and understanding how tasks are allocated and how they might be perceived and everything. I personally sort of treat everybody, I hope, and I believe sort of fairly and equitably, but I do understand there are some biases that are involved, and some people perhaps sort of revert to certain behaviours where society assumes that, and I think that's sort of for me the more important thing. But as a male, as a man, I have to sort of proactively try to push against that and encourage the men to do their certain do their aspects of these admin tasks, that perhaps it's just not to get away from this sort of perception. So it is for me a kind of a cultural and a systemic thing, and I think the way that men and women behave has to change to address the balance, and that needs to be carefully done. And it's not easy, and sometimes we're going to get it wrong, and sometimes we're going to tread on each other's toes and it come across in the wrong way. But I think if it's genuinely perceived and people can actively encourage that, then it will move the needle. But it is going to take a bit of time, and we're trying to do our best here to address that. But it is a balance on both sides. The men to be sort of more understanding of that and not assume things, and the women to push back and challenge and do so. It sits on both sides, but it is not an easy discussion to have. But that doesn't prevent us from, we should be having the discussion and being open about it. So yeah, it's really interesting to listen to all of your viewpoints, and that's sort of intrinsically why I'm here, to sort of look at it from the different perspective.
Yeah, I think so. There's 2 points there that you made. The first one is maybe women speak up and maybe we say no. And the other thing is men also need to be our champions and maybe call that out when they see it happening in work environments as well, because it's a team thing really, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It needs acceptance and challenge on all sides, but in a safe environment to do that, essentially.
Yes. Okay, that's great, Rob. Thank you. I'm just going to put you back on mute again. So I'm taking away your ability to speak. I do apologise. All right. So Becky, you've got your hand up as well. Becky Tyler, do you want to give us some of your thoughts there?
Becky said it was an accident in the chat. Putting a hand up.
No, that's absolutely fine. Nada? Are you there, Nada? Okay, I'm going to go back to one of our panelists now. Holly, how easy do you think it is to say no? So somebody comes to you and they say, oh, can you just go and make that person a cup of tea, or could you just organise this meeting, or could you just put this in the calendar? How easy do you think it is to say no and maybe nominate somebody else? Would that make you feel uncomfortable personally?
I think it would depend on the situation. I think that's what's coming through in some of the chat, or what's non-promotable or not valued. What's the difference, sort of thing? Because some of these things we're talking about do help raise your visibility and do can have a positive impact. So they're not necessarily all negative, where we're talking about where they are negative and where, you are stuck in a cycle, and you're not getting any reward or recognition. So, yeah, it's not to say that, and I think we'll come on to it a bit later on, but like, you can really raise your profile and visibility by being involved in employee networks and taking on other, roles or responsibilities outside of your day job, that really can help with that. So yeah, so it's important to sort of just say, we're really picking on the things where, it really is the kind of the note taking or the taking the cling film off and the microaggressions and that sort of thing, the organising of a space, onboarding people maybe, and doing the birthday cards and social events. And the impact it has, as I say, in terms of taking you away from doing things that might be more important to your career progression. But I think just going back to your original question, it is hard to no. I think I would feel much more comfortable now at this stage of my career, but certainly back when I was starting out. I would have probably wanted to say, yes, of course and I'll take the minutes and, and because I would have seen it as that it's a way for me to raise my profile or have that visibility. Because actually using note taking as an example, I'm maybe going to be then circulating those notes, they're coming from me. It's an opportunity to demonstrate some skills and leadership skills, organizational skills and things like that. So I think that can depend as well as to your stage in your career. I think I would try and frame it though with that rotation suggestion rather than saying no, or talking about actually what your workload is and what the priorities are. Well, actually, we're working on X, Y, Z. So and maybe you can maybe suggest an alternative. So there's a couple of things I think you can do technique wise rather than just the blanket no. I'm absolutely not doing that, and not giving any context or not offering a solution.
Maybe the question's there as well from the person who's asking you, why have they zoned in on you specifically? Do they see it as your skill set, or are they asking you because you're a woman? And maybe we all need to analyse ourselves a little bit more.
Yeah.
Lisa, as a senior and a manager in your profession, do you find that women, when they're in their, say, personal development reviews or similar exercises, they talk more about support and facilitation, whereas men might talk about where they've contributed to a project or met a hard target, such as profit, or I know you don't do profit in the public sector, but that sort of hard target thing. What do you perceive there?
So typically, what I've found in terms of running, like how I've operated with my team and even some of my own experiences, is that question around what have you done and how have you found things, is that typically if you start to say that, you're being asked to do those non-promotable tasks, and you find that actually that should be shared equally around colleagues within the team, that actually there is a perception that people will see you as a blocker to just getting things done, and actually they don't. I would just kind of, before I go on to your main question, there is, I wanted to just follow up on some of the things that I've heard discussed today, is that especially when I've had my one-to-ones with men, that it's you could be deemed to be being emotional. Does that make sense? If you're kind of expressing your views around being asked to do certain tasks. As a manager myself, I would like to think, having experienced some of those challenges and those frustrating conversations myself over time, that I try to make sure that I give the females within my team that opportunity to actually share their views and their feelings around what they're being asked to work on and where they see their future career progression. Obviously, within public sector, we don't get promoted just based on our outputs. There's very different rules around how we recruit within the public sector. You typically, if you want to go to a next level of a job in the organisation, you may have to go for a completely different role that demands more salary based on an evaluation that's gone through a HR process. So it's slightly different in public sector, but certainly my own experiences and the experiences of some of the more junior levels members of staff is that they don't feel comfortable. They don't feel comfortable sharing how they're feeling in their one-to-ones, especially if it's a male female in one-to-one setting. And I think that is something that we do need to still try to address. One of the things that was coming to my mind when I was listening to people speak was that there is a level of unconscious bias. I don't think men necessarily typically, and I don't want to come across as a man hater on these calls, but I don't think men necessarily know that they're doing it. But I do think there is a level of unconscious bias that we're still seeing that we need to try and address to make young people and people in the more junior levels of their roles feel comfortable to be able to say, no, I'm not comfortable. I don't want to be just seen as this person. I don't want to be pigeonholed into this space. Actually, I have contributed and I have made this large scale procurement or contract construction project a success. And I think it's about empowering young women as well to be able to do that. So
Thanks, Lisa. Some really great points there. Touching on that, there's a message in the chat from Rosie Dilk, and she's put there, is being the person who takes control of introductions non-promotable? Surely that demonstrates leadership. I think that's a really interesting comment, because where does the barrier between organisation or being a great organiser stop and being a leader start? Hannah, I mean, what are your thoughts here? Have you sometimes blurred across those lines or had your tasks sort of misrepresented?
I think it depends on the circumstances and the situation. But I think reading some of the comments in the chat, I think one of the things we do need to be doing as women is shouting our own corner and blowing our own trumpet, because actually, these are the sorts of things that now are actually seen, rather than being the softer skills, they're being the emotional intelligence. And actually, a lot of organisations now are saying how important that is around having that emotional intelligence at leadership levels. And I think, as women, we are damn good at being organised and multitasking and balancing and spinning a lot of plates. And actually, we need to get better at demonstrating and shouting about that, but demonstrating the value that adds to the organisation. So I think for things like when you're doing APRs, look at what you've done through the year that you might determine or might be deemed as unpromotable tasks, but actually demonstrate how that's added to the successful organisation and how it's delivered in those spaces. Because I think that's really, really important to do. And I don't think we're good enough at doing that. And we really need to, have our own backs and make sure that we're demonstrating that. But I think going back to Lisa's point about, making sure that this isn't about having a bash at men. It's not at all, because what I'd rather we do is we call men in rather than call them out. And actually, my view would be that if you are in a meeting and you're a male and you see something happening, maybe just say, oh no, so and so did that last time. Actually, how about we share that and rotate that around to somebody else this time? And I think it's about having men as allies supporting in that. So it's not us having to have that conversation or make that comment, that actually it's being addressed by somebody else before we actually even have to say anything.
That's a really strong point, actually. Yeah, and we do need men to be our champions as much as we need to work with them. So I think it's very much a dual role there. There is there are a few more comments on the chat. One of them which stuck out to me was a lady was at a conference recently, and the person facilitating actually asked the audience to decide who on their table would be the one to take the notes, and it changed the whole sort of status of where people doing it. And it was actually one of the more senior gentlemen that decided to do that and take it upon himself. Whereas I think probably we can all agree that maybe a woman would have jumped in. I mean, Holly, what do you think in terms of women jumping in to be that sort of support person? Do you think we do it too much? Do you think we need to pull back and let other people have a go?
Necessarily think we do it too much, because as we've talked about, it's a skill, it's a required skill, that organisation, leadership. I think what we want to sort of focus on here is where it's detrimental or it's repetitive behaviour that has a negative impact on progression. I think it's either the being comfortable waiting and letting somebody else, and that can be difficult and awkward. Or yeah, it's where it's given to us, so we haven't jumped in, but it's been allocated to us. That task been assigned to us, and the chap that spoke earlier and some of the comments are absolutely spot on in terms of people leading by example. I know in my last organisation, when we would have a senior team meeting, the director would just get up and do it because he'd seen too many times where people would look to me as the only female in the room to do it, and really subtle. He didn't say anything. The next time he just got up and did it, and that was really powerful from that visibility, that leadership, that role modeling behavior that he did that just changed the dynamic going forward. And he didn't say, he didn't have to say a word. He didn't have to call it out that no, that's not Holly's role, or anybody could do that. He just did it, and I think that's important. But so yeah, I don't think we always jump in too quickly. I think it's about when it's assigned to us where it can be negative.
Yeah. And you'll always remember that guy for jumping up and doing that because you'll have a lot of respect for him, won't you? Yeah. To touching back on the promotion aspect, the non-promotable task aspect. At my current role at McDonald's, we have pride values, and one of those is inclusion, and we're expected also to demonstrate in our reviews where we've contributed back towards the team. So not just gone in and done our jobs and been fantastic, although I'm sure we all are, but actually where we've brought back to the team, where we've brought back learning, where we facilitated, where we supported in terms of initiatives, whether that be charity or for community. Do you think introducing that a more of a stronger aim and objective for everybody would make everybody more open-minded? Holly, do you think it'd not just focus on work tasks, but also what you can do for your community as a whole?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's about putting the value on it, isn't it? So it's about the recognition and the value. And I mentioned about employee networks a little bit earlier on. If being a chair of that and being able to have that CPD outside of your day job, or whether it's volunteering, the social value, the participation in charity events with work. If the value of doing that is seen as important, and or like you suggest, it's recognised. So yes, same at Graham, respect is one of our core values. So when you have your annual appraisal, we call them Connect. You're asked about your behavioural competencies and how do you meet that respect. So don't tell me how. Well, then people are able to say, well, I'm chair of a network, or I'm a fur ambassador, or I've done this volunteering. And that's how you're demonstrating that as a value or as a capability in your something that's been recognised and appraised.
Mm. Thanks, Holly. Yeah, Beth Fox put in the questions rather than placing emphasis on individuals challenging. Should we be building this into our vision? And I think that really talks to that culture of collaboration when it comes to non-promotable tasks, because as you ladies have already pointed out, these activities need doing. That this is what the company runs on, but they should be shared activities.
I think that's
Yeah.
really important, Paula, as well, because I think it shouldn't just be on the individual or the woman to say no, because that puts that responsibility on that individual rather than fixing the system itself. The solution has to be that organisations and businesses need to recognise and reward this work properly. And I can say, where I am at the moment at Clancy, I've really personally experienced what a difference that can make. I've been supported, I've been trusted, and ultimately ended up being promoted into the role I'm in now because the organised recognised the full breadth of my contribution. So that wasn't just the visible outputs of what I was delivering, it was things like the leadership elements, the coordination, all that people focus work that sits around that delivery. And I think that's really reflected more broadly across the Clancy organisation because it's really looking to change that narrative. We've got a huge initiative that happens every year, which is the Celebrating Clancy Awards. And that deliberately recognises behaviours such as collaboration, care, going above and beyond, which makes all of those maybe previously invisible work visible. And then it also then, through our Clancy Cares aspects, we recognise the equality, the diversity, the inclusion. So we're really looking to broaden what leadership and performance actually mean and looking at all of those various aspects. And I think when organisations do that, and they do that well, it means that as women, we're not having to choose in between being helpful or progressing. And actually, I'm a really good example of that, that when the system does work, women and people in general can thrive a lot better. So I think that's got to be where the difference has to sit.
You think that there is a correlation, and I know Clancy is an established construction company in Sevils, and you've just said how great they are at that. Do you think there's a correlation between longer, more older, established companies, and maybe newer companies with a different demographic? Do you think there's a different approach there?
I'll be honest, I don't think there is, Paula, because you could say that an older organisation has a view of, well, we've always done it like this is how we're going to continue to do it. I think the difference is when you've got an older organisation and they actually choose to adapt and update how they think and how they view things, that I think is really powerful because you can have newer businesses that can come in and straight away they set it up and go, no, this is how we're going to operate. It's going to be fair across the board. There's going to be equity and equality for everybody. So I think in general, it's about the ethos of the organisation, but also about the leadership of the organisation as well, that they recognise that it's important and something needs to change. So I think, that is at the crux of it. And that you've got people in there who actually support moving towards a different way of working.
Yeah, so a top-down approach is what you're saying, and we can all stand here on our own and say no, but really the leadership approach needs to cascade that attitude and awareness down.
Paula,
Lisa,
sorry.
sorry.
No, I was just going to come in on that point because I work with a lot of contractors, and I work with the smaller size businesses right up to your big tier ones. And I would have to say that I don't necessarily agree that it's those long-standing organisations, but I tend to that have actually got it right. I think it is a mix across the board. Certainly, what I've seen, there is a generational sort of thing here that needs to be thought about. I think younger men coming into the industry do see the value and do tend to treat women more equally and share those roles and see the value of having female representation on leadership boards and things like that. Unfortunately, what I tend to see, or what I have seen myself in meetings, is that there is still, it's more a generational thing. And it, like I say, it's not necessarily a bad thing or people doing it on purpose, but I do think that it's that culture of, well, it's always been like that. Or, people are coming from a culture where women did used to stay at home. They did used to do, they weren't out in the field, they weren't working, they never had careers. So that perception is still kind of entrenched in an unconscious bias type of way. And I touched on that earlier. So just wanted to kind of say, I don't think it is any kind of geared towards the size of an organisation or the age of an organisation. I do think it is about leaders and the leadership within the organisation realising and making a conscious feeling like that we need to change, we need to move on, we need to move forward, we need to progress. So I just wanted to kind of come in on that point that Hannah was making a moment ago.
Thank you for that. I was about to come to you as well and just ask for your thoughts on that, so that was perfect
Oh,
timing.
sorry. Thank you.
No, not at all. Anybody can jump in at any point if they've got something to say. So do you know, there's so much chat coming in, so many questions. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm trying to concentrate on you guys on the panel, and I'm reading some of the chat with absolute fascination. I'm going to go to Lauren Sobey now. If you can come on, Lauren, you've had your hand up. You've been very patient, so I'm just going to put you on talk now.
Oh, sorry, I didn't actually mean to put my hand up there.
Oh, well, it's nice to hear from you anyway. I'm going to
Nice
mute
to hear
you
from
again.
you.
Yeah. Nada? Nada, are you there? No. Can you hear us, Nada? No worries. We'll go on to another person. All right. Okay. So, Rebecca Stone in the chat has said, okay, so what does an organisation need to address that needs to consciously recognise the value of all contributions staff make, regardless of personal characteristics? So what are the takeaways here for recommendations to improve this in organisations? And I would like to hear from any gentlemen that we've got on this call as well, because we really appreciate your take on that. But until some of the gentlemen put their hand up, can I just move back to Holly to answer that? So what are your recommendations and takeaways to start to level this out?
So I think we touched on some of that already. So we're talking about the recognizing the value. So whether that's in an annual PDR, and it's aligned to your company's values. If, like I said, Graham, respect is a core value, so we have behavioural competencies around that. So there's something there. We would also be doing things with our managers that asks them to consider who are being put forward for things like ILM, so Institute of Leadership and Management Development Programs. I suppose that's linked to sort of succession planning as well. So looking at who in your organisation, I think that goes a little bit back to that sort of stretch roles, or when we were giving the examples about CVs, who in your organisation is coming through that pipeline, which will help with gender pay gaps and all that sort of stuff. So I think some of the things organisations can do is valuing the impact, consistency. So making it part of processes, making it fair wherever possible, which I know again is a massive task in its own right. There's just a couple of examples.
Yeah, thank you. Again, we're just going to some of the questions now. I'm just going to have a quick look at these. Do you think, sorry, staying with you, Holly, do you think there is inertia in businesses or organisations and it's hard to get that SLT sponsor to step in for you?
I think, well, yeah, I mean, I think it can be. Some organisations, are doing some great stuff around this. Like Graham, for example, with our employee networks, we've got exec sponsors, and they are from our leadership team, and they're sponsors that want to be, and they're visible and they're active, and so therefore they're role modelling behaviours. So that's very helpful. With just going back, I suppose, to inviting men in as well to the conversation. And I think somebody else has mentioned it in the chat about International Women's Day events, invites going to all. We have sessions around menopause, whether that's menopause, whether it's neurodiversity, from our women's networks, and they are open to all. And we get some great feedback from people in our organisation saying, that really helped me actually, because this is something that I'm experiencing in my personal life, with my partner or a family member, if that, around neurodiversity or menopause. So they're actually learning something that's going to benefit them personally in the personal life, but also how they support colleagues. So yeah, they're invited and included in the conversation, and then they hear people's stories. And I do hear a lot people saying, men for example, saying, well, I just didn't realise, or I didn't, and that never occurred to me, or does that really still go on? And so they're having an opportunity to hear people's stories, I think, which is often, and people's experiences, which is quite powerful, because they just don't see it or they don't hear it, because it doesn't affect them directly, maybe. So there's a few things there, around getting involved, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. We talked earlier, and there was a few comments in the chat about women can be seen as confrontational if they say, I'm not going to do that, and you've only asked me because I'm female and all the rest of it. What do you think is the best way to sort of calm that down, or turn around and say, actually, there is another solution to this?
I mean, I'm happy to come in on that one if you don't mind, Paula.
Yeah.
So I can give an example of an experience that I had. So I was on a call with a senior member of another local authority, a director level, and I was given some level of advice around a procurement in the construction sector, and we had a slight difference of opinion. And, you know, I basically, in the end, I said, look, you know, we're going round in circles. I think we need to end this call here. We need to both take some time. We'll come back. I'll go away and do some, like, you know, digging. You do the same, and we'll come back to see how best to tackle it. And the comment I got made to me was, don't get so emotional. And I think it's, you know, if that was a gentleman on the other end having quite a, you know, a direct conversation, comments like don't get over emotional wouldn't necessarily be made. And I think the reason I'm bringing that up here now is because how you asked, how do we say no? Or how are we more direct in saying our views? And when you are, I've had comments made, oh, you know, Lisa's a very strong woman. What does that mean? Lisa's a very strong woman, you know, because I've had to say no, or I've had to have those difficult conversations, right? But I've only learnt how to do that as I've got older. You know, often what we talk about, we see women still being asked to do things, but also the young women that are coming into the field. And do they have the level of confidence to be able to address? So it comes back to that leadership and how it's entrenched in the organisation that you work within, to be able to have those difficult conversations and be able to have the confidence to be able to say, no, you know, I'm not comfortable with continuing this conversation, or I'm not comfortable with continue doing that same task that I've done for the last 6 meetings. And it is about empowering and, like I'd say, nurturing. Yes, women naturally have a nurturing role. You know, we're often seen as those caregivers in our own personal lives, and that naturally then comes and follows through. But as a professional female in an organisation, it takes guts as well to be able to stand up and say and stand and be counted and to share. And I've only kind of adapted that. I have been on leadership. I've been really lucky that my manager is a man, Barry, who has absolutely seen something in me and valued me and allowed me to progress. But unfortunately that doesn't happen, and so we all have a part to play around enabling the younger women coming into our sectors to be able to feel empowered to have those conversations. But it doesn't come easy. You know, I've learned that as time's gone on. So I just wanted to share that experience, you know.
I agree with that, Lisa. I remember a few number of years ago, I had a boss who didn't really rate me because I hadn't come the path that he thought I should have done, that was the path that looked like him, and he always compared my journey to his. And I remember sitting in a performance review the once, and he was going through all these and saying, you need to do this before you're going to progress, you're going to have to do this before you get promoted. And I remember turning around to him, and it was one of those moments where I was just like, I'm not having this. And I turned around and I said, respectfully, you either support me on my journey or you get out of my way, because I know where I'm going. I've got the evidence behind me to back it up. I've also got the support from others within the organisation. And actually, you know, I really like your support, but if you're not, I'm not going to stop, because I know where I'm going to and I know how good I am at what I do. And I think the thing is, you've got to have that inner confidence to do that. I would, if you'd have said I'd have done that years ago when I started, I'd have laughed and gone, absolutely no way. But I think we've also got to be very comfortable in actually, you know, being assertive and saying what it is we want, and saying, well, actually, no, this is evidence of everything that I've delivered. And I think we have to do that. But I think also there's different ways that maybe we can stay frame things. And I think maybe the better way to be is be curious rather than accusatory. So when we're having simple questions like, go, are we able to pause on that? Or why are we always asking the same person to do this? Or actually, is there maybe a fairer way to share this? Can we rotate this so it's not falling on the same person? Because actually, we can then interrupt those patterns without causing tension. Because oftentimes, you know, a lot of us don't want to be causing confrontation. We want to just be naming the behaviour rather than person, and doing that consistently. But I think also, if there are people within the room who are at a senior level, you know, them doing that and having that position of influence actually can help, because it takes the pressure off that person that's being impacted. So I think at times just look at how we can reframe things rather than just, going straight, no, nobody's doing that. And as I said, it's about calling people in rather than calling people out. I think your sound's gone, Paula.
Oh dear. Can
There
you
you
hear me
go.
any
You're
better
back.
now?
Yeah.
I hate to have to shout. I was just going to say we're back to that point again where our senior leadership needs to model those behaviours. We need really, really good senior leadership who recognises that teams who share tasks are stronger for everybody. Because it does make more sense that everybody pitch in and learn different skill sets, doesn't it? I think, and we have also got another question in the chat. This is from an anonymous participant, but they've mentioned AI. I did wonder how long it would take for that to come up. And they've mentioned it in terms of, do you think the advances in technology are going to actually remove some of those non-promotable tasks like taking notes? What's your thoughts on this, Lisa?
I mean, yeah, certainly. I think there's a number of roles that will become obsolete over time. Even when you look at I go back to like my daughter's homework and they're using ChatGPT or they're using ChatGPT to tell them what they need to do around like I know my boss does it around planning is what he has to respond to in emails and things like that. It is so advanced that actually some of those administrative tasks I certainly feel will kind of be whittled out over time. But obviously it's that face-to-face thing. I don't think there's any better way than sitting in front of somebody and having a conversation in terms of building up your network of people and building relationships for that true collaboration that is really, really needed in the construction sector. And I don't think that can be replaced by AI. I think that's certainly something that's going to be needed. But those more minute taking, note taking, Excel spreadsheets, all of those number crunching things. I certainly think that, over time, we will start to see that playing a bigger role, certainly in procurement as well. They're talking about AI doing assessments of evaluations and looking at model answers and things like that. So sadly, I do think that AI will start to encroach on some of that sort of more non-promotable tasks. But I'd like to say, that face-to-face is still something that we need, and we need those relationships, and that can't be done by a robot. So I think some of the jobs are safe, but yeah, sadly, I do think that AI will start to take on some of those areas.
I would also just say as well, from an AI perspective, AI can be incredibly helpful in shoring up how those non-promotable tasks deliver against the business. So if you throw some pointers or things into AI, so something like Copilot, etc., and you say, this is these sorts of tasks that I've done, can you morph this into some evidence how I can support in my next performance review to determine and evidence what I have delivered? And actually, it can be really incredibly powerful because you can use that and you can build up a bank of evidence that your next APR can go, well, look, these are all the things I've done as additional or as in part of my role. This is how it's helped me deliver and support against the organisation's requirements. And there you've got evidence there then that you can have a very persuasive discussion to demonstrate the value that you're bringing to the business.
Yeah, I agree with that because actually sometimes articulating how you want to put your views across and having something like that, like you say, Copilot, that can help you shape that is obviously invaluable, because sometimes you just don't know how to put your words across in a way that it doesn't come across as a detrimental way that actually, or like like that sort of aggressive way that, or you're being challenging, but actually putting kind of that into a system like Copilot or ChatGPT and it giving you that communication for you to be able to then put that across in your one-to-ones, I think is a really valuable tool that could be used. So I really agree with that, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can now, Paula. Yeah.
My sound keeps going a little bit, so sorry about that. We're now coming up close to the end of the webinar. I have found this chat to be super interesting. I've really, really enjoyed myself and I hope everybody here has as well. I'd like to thank our panelists, first of all, who have joined us today, and for all of you for attending and making it so enjoyable. So thank you, Holly, Hannah and Lisa. You've been absolute superstars. Thank you, and I've certainly learned something today. Would really encourage you to continue these conversations after the webinar today. You can join the IWCE LinkedIn group, and the organisers will drop a link into this discussion for you to access now if you'd like to do that. And also don't forget, you can celebrate your great colleagues, EDI initiatives and organisations for the Inspiring Women in Construction and Engineering Awards that I mentioned at the start of this webinar. So I'd just like to say now, thank you everybody for attending, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day. Thanks so much, and goodbye.